At my ex-husband's vow renewal party, his new wife introduced me as the past mistake. They didn't expect the toast I had prepared. I never thought a cream-colored envelope could make my hands shake so much. But there it was, sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally worked up the courage to open it. My name, Gina Davis, was written in perfect calligraphy across the front. Inside was an invitation to my ex-husband's vow renewal ceremony with his new wife, Caroline. 10 years of marriage to her, 15 to me before that. 25 years of Robert's life neatly divided between 2 women. "Mom, are you going?" My daughter Emma asked, leaning against the doorframe of my kitchen. At 22, she had her father's height and my stubbornness. She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in her voice. "I don't know, honey. It seems strange to attend." Emma sighed. "Dad says it would mean a lot to him, and Caroline specifically asked for you to be there." She paused. "For us. For me and Jason." My son Jason, 2 years younger than Emma, appeared behind her. "It's weird if you're not there, Mom. Everyone's going to be asking where you are." I stared at the invitation again. A celebration of Robert and Caroline's decade-long marriage at the Westfield Country Club, the same venue where Robert and I had our wedding reception. Either Caroline didn't know, or she didn't care. Neither option made me feel better. "I'll think about it," I said finally, but I already knew I would go. For Emma and Jason. Always for them. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down the navy blue dress I'd purchased specifically for this event. It was elegant but not flashy. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. My silver-streaked brown hair was pulled back in a simple updo, and I wore the pearl earrings my mother had given me on my own wedding day. A small act of defiance, perhaps. "You look nice, Mom," Emma said, appearing in my doorway in a rose-colored bridesmaid dress. Caroline had asked her to be part of the ceremony. Jason was a groomsman. "Do I look like I'm trying to upstage the bride?" I asked, only half joking. Emma rolled her eyes. "Mom, stop. You look appropriate and dignified." Dignified. That was what I was aiming for. Dignified presence, dignified exit. Just get through the evening for my children's sake. The ceremony was held in the garden pavilion. I slipped into a seat in the back row, nodding politely to familiar faces. Old friends from when Robert and I were married, his colleagues, extended family. Some looked surprised to see me. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Robert stood at the altar, handsome as ever in his tailored suit, silver touching his temples. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded slightly, and I returned the gesture. 25 years of history reduced to a polite acknowledgement. The ceremony was mercifully brief. Caroline looked radiant in her champagne-colored gown, renewing her vows, with confident declarations of love. I watched my children standing beside them, part of this new family portrait. The ache in my chest was familiar, not the sharp pain of betrayal that I'd felt years ago, but a dull reminder of what had been lost. The reception was held in the grand ballroom. I found my assigned seat at a table far from the main party, with distant cousins and colleagues I barely knew. Another subtle message about where I stood in the hierarchy of importance. I was making small talk with Robert's elderly aunt when Caroline appeared beside our table, champagne glass in hand. "So glad you could make it, Gina," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Robert was worried you might not come." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, matching her fake warmth. The ceremony was lovely. Well, family is family, right? Even the complicated parts? She laughed lightly, touching my shoulder. Before I could respond, she turned to address the small group gathered at our table. "For those who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Gina, allow me to introduce her properly." She raised her voice slightly, drawing attention from nearby tables. "This is Gina, Robert's first wife. The past mistake, as we sometimes joke. The silence that followed was deafening. A few uncomfortable chuckles broke out. Someone coughed. I felt heat rush to my face as all eyes turned to me. Caroline. Robert's aunt whispered, mortified, but Caroline just laughed, as if she'd made a harmless joke. "Oh, we're all adults here. Gina knows I'm just teasing. Don't you, Gina?" I felt something crack inside me, a dam holding back 15 years of carefully contained feelings. But I'd learned long ago how to maintain composure in public. I smiled tightly. "Of course," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, though I prefer to think of myself as a learning experience rather than a mistake. A few genuine laughs this time. Caroline's smile faltered slightly before she excused herself to greet other guests. I sat frozen in my chair, the words, "past mistake," echoing in my head. Is that how they referred to me in private? Is that what my children heard about their mother? "Don't mind her," Robert's aunt patted my hand. "That was terribly rude." I nodded absently, scanning the room. I caught sight of Emma across the ballroom. The look on her face told me she'd witnessed the entire exchange. Beside her, Jason stared at his shoes, shoulders hunched in discomfort. Took a deep breath and stood up. I wouldn't cause a scene. I wouldn't give Caroline the satisfaction. But I also wouldn't sit at this table all night like some discarded relic. I'd come for my children, shown my support, and now I needed to leave before I said something I'd regret. As I made my way toward the exit, I passed the gift table. Next to the ornate guest book lay a small stack of cards for guests who wished to toast the happy couple later in the evening. Without thinking, I picked up one of the cards and a pen. My hand moved almost of its own accord. I may have been introduced as the past mistake tonight, but I was tired of letting others define me. Perhaps it was time to offer a toast of my own. The drive home from the country club was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Caroline's words, "the past mistake," playing on a continuous loop in my mind. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the tears I'd been holding back streamed freely down my face. Inside my modest two-bedroom house, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the couch, not bothering to turn on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate for the heaviness in my chest. Past mistake. Is that all I was after 15 years of marriage? After birthing 2 children? After standing by Robert's side as he built his law practice from nothing? I closed my eyes, and memories I'd worked hard to suppress came rushing back. Robert and I met in college. I was an art major with dreams of opening my own gallery. He was a pre-law student with a 5-year plan mapped out in precise detail. We were opposites in many ways, but there was an undeniable chemistry between us. When he looked at me in those early days, I felt seen in a way I never had before. "You're different, Gina," he told me on our 3rd date. "You see the world in colors I've never even noticed." We married a year after graduation. I put my gallery dreams on hold to support him through law school, working 2 jobs while he studied. It was temporary, we agreed. My turn would come. When Emma arrived, followed by Jason 2 years later, my dreams shifted to accommodate our growing family. I painted in the spare room when the children napped, built a small portfolio between soccer practices and PTA meetings. Robert's career took off. Junior partner by 35, full partner by 40. We moved to a bigger house in a better neighborhood. From the outside, we had it all. I fingered the business card in my pocket. GD Art Consultancy. My modest venture. Started after the divorce. It had taken me years to rebuild my confidence, to believe I had something valuable to offer. The signs of our unraveling were subtle at first. Robert staying later at the office, checking his phone more frequently, growing irritated when I talked about applying for a position at the local art center. "Is this really the right time, Gina?" he'd say. "The kids need stability. My practice is at a critical stage." My turn never seemed to come. Then came the night of Robert's firm holiday party, 15 years into our marriage. The night I met Caroline, his new legal assistant, young, ambitious, hanging on his every word. I recognized the look in his eyes, the same look he'd once given me. That night, watching them together, I knew. The confrontation came weeks later. His denial, followed by anger, followed by blame. "If you hadn't been so focused on your art hobby, maybe I wouldn't have looked elsewhere," he said, the words cutting deep. "A man needs to feel supported, Gina." The irony was crushing. I'd spent 15 years supporting him, subjugating my own ambitions for his success, and now I was being blamed for not being supportive enough. The divorce was quick, but brutal. Robert had resources, connections, a certain narrative about our marriage that people were eager to believe. The dedicated lawyer and father, the distracted artsy wife who didn't understand his world. I was too shell-shocked to fight effectively. 6. Months after our divorce was finalized, Robert married Caroline. Emma was 12, Jason 10. Young enough to be confused, old enough to be hurt. The early years after the divorce were the hardest. Robert and Caroline quickly established themselves as the stable household. Regular schedules, home-cooked meals, though Caroline didn't cook them, her housekeeper did, and educational family outings. My smaller house and art supplies scattered. Across the dining table seemed chaotic in comparison. "Mom, why is there never any food in the fridge?" Jason asked once during a weekend visit. Later, I learned Caroline had been sending the kids home with care packages, a gesture of concern that only highlighted my deficiencies. Gradually, I found my footing. I started GD Art Consultancy, helping local businesses select and display artwork. I made new friends, dated occasionally, though nothing serious stuck. I learned to co-parent with Robert and Caroline, swallowing my pride at school functions and birthday parties for the sake of Emma and Jason. The sound of my phone ringing pulled me from my thoughts. Emma's name flashed on the screen. "Mom? Where are you? You just disappeared." I cleared my throat. "I'm home, honey. I wasn't feeling well." "Is this because of what Caroline said?" "Dad's furious with her. He took her aside right after you left." "It's fine, Emma. I'm fine." I wasn't. But what good would it do to say otherwise? "It's not fine, Mom. It was cruel and embarrassing. Even Jason said so, and you know he never gets involved in this stuff." I felt a surge of gratitude for my children. Despite everything, they'd grown into compassionate adults. "Thank you for checking on me. Enjoy the rest of the evening, all right? We'll talk tomorrow." After hanging up, I changed out of my dress and scrubbed off my makeup. In the bathroom mirror, I hardly recognized myself. When had I become this person who accepted humiliation with a polite smile? Who walked away, rather, than standing her ground? The woman staring back at me looked tired. But beneath the fatigue, I saw something else. A spark of determination that I thought had been extinguished years ago. I walked to my studio, flipping on the lights. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, some in progress. My work had evolved. Over the years, growing more confident, more authentic. Unlike my marriage, my art had survived. On my desk lay a brochure for a prestigious art fair in Chicago. I'd been invited to submit my portfolio, but had been hesitating, doubting whether I was ready for that level of exposure. I picked up the brochure, Caroline's words still ringing in my ears. The past mistake. Perhaps it was time to stop letting the past define me. Perhaps it was time to show Robert, Caroline, my children, and most importantly, myself, exactly who Gina Davis was. I reached for the guest card I'd taken from the reception, staring at the words I'd impulsively written. I didn't know if I'd have the courage to deliver this toast at the upcoming family graduation dinner, where both families would gather again. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done being silenced. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "You okay, Mom? That was seriously not cool what Caroline did." I smiled, typing back, "I'm better than okay. I'm finally waking up." The morning after. The vow renewal ceremony. I woke up with swollen eyes and a heaviness in my chest that felt like concrete. I reached for my phone out of habit, wincing at the brightness of the screen. 3 missed calls from Emma, a text from Jason asking if I was okay, and surprisingly, a voicemail from Robert. I ignored them all and shuffled to the kitchen to make coffee. As the machine gurgled to life, I stared out the window at my small backyard. The garden I'd planted last spring was thriving, vibrant dahlias and black-eyed Susans stretching toward the morning sun. At least something in my life was flourishing. The doorbell rang just as I poured my first cup. Through the peephole, I spotted Emma shifting nervously on the front steps. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but I knew my car in the driveway had already given me away. "Hey," she said when I opened the door. Her eyes were tired, her bridesmaid dress exchanged for jeans and a sweatshirt. "I brought bagels." I stepped aside to let her in, grateful for her presence despite my desire to lick my wounds in private. "You didn't have to check on me," I said, leading her to the kitchen. "Actually, I did." She placed the paper bag on the counter and turned to face me. "What Caroline did was horrible, Mom, and I just stood there." I busied myself getting plates. "You were in an impossible position." Dad yelled at her afterward. I've never seen him so angry. "Did he?" I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "That's something, I suppose." "He said she crossed a line, that you didn't deserve that." I let out a dry laugh. How noble of him. 10 years? Too late. Emma flinched slightly, and I immediately regretted my bitterness. My issues with Robert weren't her burden to carry. "I'm sorry, honey." I shouldn't have said that. I handed her a coffee mug, our conversation shifting to safer topics, her graduate program, her roommate's new puppy. After Emma left, promising to bring Jason by later that week, I retreated to my studio. Painting had always been my refuge, the place where I could process emotions too complex for words. I set up a fresh canvas and lost myself in broad strokes of deep blues and purples, externalizing the churning feelings inside me. Hours later, my phone rang again. This time it was my friend Diane. "I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "Lisa was there. She called me this morning." Diane had been my rock through the divorce. Unlike mutual friends who'd felt obligated to choose sides, and mostly chosen Robert's, she had stayed fiercely loyal. It was humiliating, I admitted, setting down my paintbrush. Standing there while she called me his past mistake in front of everyone. "That woman is vile," Diane declared. "Always has been." The worst part is knowing they probably refer to me that way in private. What must the kids think, hearing that? "Have you talked to Robert?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. "He left a voicemail. I haven't listened to it yet." "Well, at least call your children back. They're worried about you." After hanging up, I finally played Robert's message. "Gina, I want to apologize for Caroline's behavior. It was inappropriate and disrespectful. Please call me back when you can." His tone was formal, distant. This was damage control, not genuine. Remorse. The Robert I'd once known, the man who would stay up all night talking through our disagreements, who brought me wildflowers just because, was long gone. This Robert was polished, controlled, always mindful of appearances. The rest of the week passed in a blur of work appointments and sleepless nights. I'd built a routine after the divorce, a carefully constructed life that worked as long as I didn't look too closely at the empty spaces. Now, Caroline's words had cracked the foundation, forcing me to confront how much I'd accepted, the subtle exclusions from family events, the way Robert and Caroline rewrote our history, the gradual erosion of my place in my children's lives. On Friday evening, Jason stopped by after his classes. Unlike Emma, who processed feelings through conversation, Jason had always been quieter, more observant. "You've been painting," he noted, glancing at my paint-stained hands. "It helps me think." He nodded, wandering into my studio to examine the canvas I'd been working on all week, dark colors gradually giving way to hints of gold and amber at the edges. "This is different from your usual stuff," he said. "I like it. It's how I feel right now, emerging from something dark." Jason studied the painting for a long moment. "Caroline tried to get me to call her Mom when I was 12, he said suddenly. "I told her I already had a mom. Dad said I was being difficult." The revelation hit like a punch to the stomach. "You never told me that." He shrugged. "Didn't want to hurt you more than you already were. My sweet, protective boy. Always carrying burdens too heavy for his young shoulders. Dad called me yesterday," he continued. "He wants us all to have dinner before graduation next week. You, me, Emma, him, and Caroline." I stiffened. "And what did you say?" "I said I'd ask you. But honestly, Mom, I don't blame you if you say no." I looked at my son. So tall now. So much like his father in appearance, but with a gentleness Robert had lost somewhere along the way. "I'll think about it," I promised. After Jason left, I returned to my painting, adding more gold to balance the darkness. Something inside me was shifting, a slow unfurling of resolve. For years, I'd been accommodating, walking on eggshells, putting my children's comfort above my own dignity. "The past mistake," I whispered to my empty studio, testing the words like pressing on a bruise to see if it still hurt. It did hurt, but maybe pain was preferable to the numbness I'd been living with. Maybe it was time to feel again. The anger, the grief, and yes, even the hope that had been dormant for too long. Sunday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine after days of rain. I took it as a sign to clean out my studio, something I'd been postponing for months. The clutter had gotten out of hand, stacks of art books, half-empty paint tubes, and years of accumulated memories. In the back of my supply closet, I found an old leather portfolio I hadn't opened since before the divorce. Inside were sketches from my college days, when possibility stretched before me like an unmarked canvas. Back when professors praised my unique perspective and raw talent. Beneath the portfolio lay a dusty cardboard box labeled personal. I hesitated before pulling it out, knowing what it contained: journals I'd kept throughout my marriage. I'd always been a chronicler of my own life, finding clarity through writing that sometimes eluded me in conversation. I settled cross-legged on the floor and opened the earliest journal, dated the year Robert and I married. The pages were filled with hope, plans for our future, dreams of the gallery I would open someday. I flipped forward through the years, watching my handwriting change from the looping script of a young woman to something more controlled, more contained. An entry from when Emma was 2 caught my eye. Robert was offered junior partnership today. We celebrated with champagne after Emma went to bed. He says once he's established, it will be my turn to focus on art. I can wait a little longer. I kept reading, journal after journal, the progression both fascinating and painful. I found an entry from the night of the firm holiday party where I'd first met Caroline. Something's wrong. I can feel Robert pulling away. Tonight he barely looked at me when I spoke, but I saw how he looked at her, his new assistant, the same way he used to look at me. Am I imagining things? Am I becoming the paranoid wife? Then came entries from the divorce period. Raw, angry pages where ink blotted through tears. I'd forgotten how visceral the pain had been, how utterly lost I'd felt. He says I never supported his career, that I was too absorbed in my hobby. Hobby. As if my art was just something to keep me occupied between cooking dinner and doing laundry. Have I been living in a completely different marriage than he has? Have I imagined the 15 years of putting his needs first? I closed the journal, my hands trembling slightly. I'd buried these feelings so deep, convinced myself that accepting the situation with grace was the mature choice. But the woman in these journals, she had fire. She had righteous anger. What had happened to her? The realization hit me with stunning clarity. I had dimmed my own light. Not just during the marriage, but after too. I had accepted the narrative Robert created, that I was difficult, selfish, not supportive enough. I had internalized Caroline's subtle digs about my parenting, my career, my choices. I had made myself small to avoid conflict. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. The graduation dinner was marked for Friday. Both families would be there to celebrate Emma completing her master's program. In the past, I would have approached such events with trepidation, carefully managing my words and actions to avoid rocking the boat. Not this time. I spent the afternoon sorting through the journals, creating a timeline of my marriage that contradicted the story Robert had been telling, the story I had allowed to stand unchallenged for too long. By evening, I knew what I needed to do. The guest card from the Vow Renewal still sat on my desk, the toast I'd impulsively drafted staring back at. I picked it up, reading the words I'd written in that moment of clarity and hurt. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began again, writing from the heart, without filters or fear of judgment. This would be my truth, finally, spoken aloud. Monday morning, I woke with renewed purpose. I dressed carefully for my meeting with a new client, a locally owned boutique hotel looking for artwork that reflected the region's natural beauty. I'd been hesitant to present my own pieces, usually preferring to connect clients with other artists. But today felt different. The hotel owner, a woman in her 60s with keen eyes and a direct manner, studied my portfolio with interest. "These landscapes have something special," she said, lingering over a series I'd painted of the coastline. "They're not just pretty views. There's emotion here." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the confidence in my voice. "I painted those after my divorce." The ocean became a metaphor for starting over. She looked at me with new interest. "You know, we're creating a narrative for each room, a story behind the artwork. Would you consider writing something to accompany these pieces?" In the past, I might have hesitated, worried about revealing too much of myself. Today, I nodded without hesitation. I'd be honored. As I drove home, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The journals had awakened something in me. Not just anger at how I'd been treated, but recognition of how I'd participated in my own erasure. I had choices now. I could continue to accept the role assigned to me, or I could rewrite the script. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Robert's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Gina," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Do you have a minute?" "I'm listening." "About Friday's dinner. I want to make sure things go smoothly for Emma's sake. Translation: please don't make a scene. Please don't embarrass us. Please be the accommodating ex-wife we've come to expect." "I'll be there," I said. "And don't worry, Robert. I know exactly what I'm going to say." A pause. "Caroline will apologize for her comment at the renewal. She knows she crossed a line." How generous of her. "Gina, I need to go, Robert. I'll see you Friday." I hung up before he could respond. The old Gina would have engaged, would have sought his approval or tried to smooth things over. The woman I was becoming didn't need his validation. Inside, I went straight to my studio and looked at the painting I'd been working on since the Vow Renewal. Dark colors gradually giving way to gold. It needed something more. I picked up my brush and added a streak of vibrant red cutting through the darkness, bold and unapologetic. That evening, as I revised my toast for the graduation dinner, I felt strangely calm. This wasn't about revenge or creating drama. It was about reclaiming my voice, my story, my place in my children's lives. Caroline had called me the past mistake. On Friday, I would show them all exactly who Gina Davis really was, and always had been. The week leading up to Emma's graduation dinner passed in a blur of client meetings and careful preparation. I'd accepted 2 new projects, the hotel commission and a local restaurant looking to showcase regional artists. My work was finally getting the recognition I'd always hoped for, and the timing couldn't have been more meaningful. Thursday evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Diane, nursing a glass of wine as I rehearsed my toast for the 100th time. "You sure about this?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "It's honest, but it's also direct." I folded the paper and tucked it into my purse. "I'm sure. I've spent too many years biting my tongue." "What about Emma? It's her celebration." "I've thought about that. This isn't about stealing her spotlight. It's about refusing to be erased anymore." I twisted my wine glass, watching the burgundy liquid catch the light. My children deserve to know their mother. The real me, not the watered-down version I've been presenting. Diane nodded slowly. "Just be prepared. Robert and Caroline won't take this lying down." "I know. But I'm not that frightened woman anymore." After Diane left, I tried on different outfits for tomorrow's dinner, finally settling on a deep emerald dress I'd bought months ago but never worn. It brought out the green in my hazel eyes, complemented my silver-streaked brown hair. For once, I didn't choose my outfit based on what would blend into the background. My phone rang just as I was hanging the dress in my closet. Emma's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, honey. Everything okay?" "Just checking in. You haven't backed out of tomorrow, have you?" I smiled at her concern. "Of course not. I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Good." She paused. "Dad called me today. He seemed worried about how things will go. Are you two fighting again?" "No, Emma. I think he's just feeling guilty about what happened at the renewal. Caroline's been weird all week. Super nice, but in that fake way, you know? She bought me an expensive graduation gift. A bracelet from Tiffany's. It feels like she's overcompensating." "Maybe she is." I sat on the edge of my bed. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" "Excited. Nervous. Glad it'll all be over soon." She laughed softly. "I'm really happy you'll be there, Mom. It wouldn't be the same without you." After we hung up, I went to my studio and stared at the painting I'd been working on all week. It was nearly finished, the darkness giving way to streaks of gold and that bold ribbon of red cutting through it all. It felt like a visual representation of my journey, from suppression to self-reclamation. I picked up my brush, adding final touches to the brightest section of the canvas. Tomorrow would be a turning point, not just for how others saw me, but for how I saw myself. Friday morning, I woke early. The dream that had pulled me from sleep lingered. I'd been standing in a crowded room trying to speak, but no sound would come out. A common anxiety dream, my therapist would say. But today it felt particularly significant. I made coffee and took it outside to my small patio, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The journal I'd been reading all week sat beside me, open to an entry from just after the divorce. I feel invisible. At Jason's baseball game, I sat in the bleachers while Robert and Caroline played Happy Family in the front row. When did I become a spectator in my own life? When did I agree to this diminished role? I ran my fingers over the words, remembering the pain of that day. The way Jason had looked to them first when he hit a home run. My presence an afterthought. By the time I showered and dressed, I felt centered, calm. The emerald dress fit perfectly, skimming my curves without being too tight or revealing. I paired it with simple gold jewelry and heels that added 2 inches to my height. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. Confident, poised, unapologetic. The graduation ceremony itself was beautiful. Emma, radiant in her cap and gown, accepting her master's degree in environmental science. I sat in the audience between Jason and my sister-in-law, Julie, Robert's younger sister who had remained friendly after the divorce. Robert and Caroline sat directly behind us, close enough that I could smell Caroline's expensive perfume. "She looks so happy," Julie whispered as Emma crossed the stage. "She does," I agreed, blinking back tears of pride. After the ceremony, we gathered in the reception hall for photographs. The photographer, hired by Robert and Caroline, of course, arranged us in various groupings. Emma with Robert and Caroline, Emma with me, Emma with both parents, Caroline hovering at the edge. "Why don't we get one with everyone?" Emma suggested. Mom, Dad, Caroline, Jason, and Aunt Julie. I tensed but stepped into position, standing on the opposite side from Robert and Caroline. As the photographer counted down, I felt Robert's gaze on me. "You look nice, Gina," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of surprise that might have stung a week ago. "Thank you, Robert." I smiled for the camera, not bothering to return the compliment. The dinner reservation was for 7 at Emma's favorite restaurant, an upscale Italian place downtown. I arrived exactly on time to find everyone already seated. Robert and Caroline on one side of the table, Emma and Jason on the other, with 2 empty chairs. "Mom!" Emma waved, her face glowing with accomplishment. "You're here!" I approached the table, aware of all eyes on me. Caroline's smile was fixed and brittle. Robert looked wary. Only my children's genuine delight gave me strength. "Congratulations, graduate," I said, kissing Emma's cheek before taking my seat. "I'm so proud of you." As I settled into my chair, I noticed the small stack of cards beside Robert's plate. Toast cards, just like at the Vow Renewal. My heart began to pound, but I took a deep breath. This time, I was prepared. This time, I would not be silenced. The waiter arrived to take drink orders. I requested a glass of Cabernet, meeting Robert's questioning gaze with a steady one of my own. Tonight was not about playing small. Tonight was about claiming my place at the table, literally and figuratively. As the appetizers arrived, I slipped a hand into my purse, feeling the folded paper with my prepared words. Soon, I would have my say. Soon, everyone at this table would know exactly who Gina Davis was. Dinner progressed with superficial pleasantries. Caroline dominated the conversation, as usual, talking about the vacation she and Robert had planned to celebrate Emma's accomplishment, a trip to Italy that had been arranged without consulting me or considering that I might want to do something special for our daughter, too. "You'll love Florence, Emma," Caroline gushed. "The art there is just magnificent." "Mom would know more about that than any of us," Jason said, glancing at me with a small smile. "She's the real artist in the family." Caroline's smile tightened. "Of course, Gina's hobby is charming." I took a sip of wine rather than responding, but I felt a warmth spread through me at Jason's quiet support. When the entrees arrived, Robert tapped his glass with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast to our graduate." He stood, lifting his wine glass. "Emma, your mother and I—" He glanced at Caroline. "All of us are incredibly proud of you. You've always been determined, focused, brilliant. You get that from—" He faltered slightly. "Well, from both sides of your family." It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging my positive influence in years. I watched Emma's face as she beamed up at her father. "To Emma," Robert concluded. "May your future be as bright as you are." We all raised our glasses. Emma blushed, with pleasure. "I have something to say, too," Caroline announced, standing before the moment had fully settled. She withdrew a card from her purse, the same size and style as the ones from the Vow Renewal. My stomach clenched. "Emma, I've watched you grow into an amazing young woman over the past 10 years, she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "While I—" came into your life when you were already becoming the person you are today? I hope I've contributed positively to your journey. I stared at my plate, forcing myself to breathe evenly. This was classic Caroline, making herself central to a story, where she was, at best, a supporting character. I may not be your birth mother, she continued with a brief glance in my direction, but I've always tried to provide the stability and guidance every young woman needs. I felt Jason tense beside me. Emma's smile had become fixed, her eyes darting between Caroline and me. To our brilliant Emma, Caroline concluded, we're so fortunate to have you in our lives. A polite round of applause followed. Robert beamed at his wife, clearly relieved that she'd behaved herself. The moment I'd been preparing for had arrived. It was now or never. I stood slowly, withdrew my folded paper, and cleared my throat. I'd like to say something too, I said, my voice stronger than I anticipated. Robert's smile faltered. Caroline's eyes narrowed. My children watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. First to Emma, my beautiful, brilliant daughter. Watching you cross that stage today was one of the proudest moments of my life. Your determination, your compassion, your fierce intelligence, they inspire me every day. Emma's eyes softened. I took a deep breath and continued. Some of you may be surprised to hear me speak tonight. I've spent years being quiet, accommodating, careful not to cause waves. I've accepted being relegated to the background of my children's lives because I thought it was what was best for them. The table had gone utterly silent. I could feel Robert's discomfort and Caroline's growing alarm. Recently, I was introduced as the past mistake at a family function. I let the words hang in the air, noting how Caroline flinched and several heads at nearby tables turned. It was humiliating, but also illuminating, because it made me realize how much I've allowed others to define who I am. I turned directly to Emma and Jason. Your father and I made many mistakes in our marriage. The divorce was painful for all of us. But loving you, raising you, being your mother, that has never been a mistake. That has been the greatest privilege of my life. Emma's eyes glistened, with tears. Jason reached over and squeezed my free hand. I've spent too long hiding parts of myself, afraid that my full presence would somehow complicate your lives. I convinced myself that stepping aside was an act of love, but I see now that by diminishing myself, I've denied you the chance to truly know your mother. A woman who is complex, creative, resilient, and yes, sometimes difficult. I glanced at Robert, whose face had drained of color. I won't apologize for taking up space in my children's lives. I won't apologize for having opinions, feelings, and needs, and I certainly won't apologize for refusing to be called a mistake, past or otherwise. Caroline started to speak, but Robert placed a warning hand on her arm. This isn't about revenge or creating drama, I continued, my voice softening. It's about truth. It's about teaching my children that they should never make themselves small, for anyone, not even the people who claim to love them. I folded the paper and tucked it away, no longer needing it. Emma, as you step into this new chapter of your life, remember that you come from a long line of strong women. My mother, who raised 3 children alone after my father died. Me, who rebuilt my life after divorce and is finally pursuing the art career I once set aside. And you, already so much braver and wiser than I was at your age. I raised my glass. To Emma, and to the power of defining your own story. The silence that followed was profound. Then Emma stood, tears streaming down her face, and embraced me. I love you, Mom, she whispered against my hair. Jason was next, wrapping his long arms around both of us. That was long overdue, he murmured. When I finally sat down, I noticed several women at nearby tables nodding in approval, a few discreetly wiping away tears. Robert looked stunned, as if seeing me for the first time in years. Caroline stared. Stonily ahead, her mouth a thin line. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur. I spoke when spoken to, smiled when appropriate, but inside I felt light, free. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating my words or monitoring my expressions. I was simply present, authentic. As the evening wound down, I hugged my children goodbye, promising to meet them for brunch on Sunday. I was gathering my purse to leave when Robert approached. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked, gesturing to a quiet corner away from the table. I nodded, following him with a composure that would have been impossible a week ago. "That was quite a speech," he said when we were alone. "It wasn't a speech, Robert. It was the truth." He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, a gesture so familiar it momentarily transported me back to our early years together. "I never thought of you as a mistake, Gina. You know that, right?" "Do I?" I studied his face, seeing hints of the man I'd once loved beneath the polished exterior. "You've allowed Caroline to marginalize me for years. You've participated in it." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I was wrong. I took the path of least resistance." "Yes, you did." I adjusted my shawl around my shoulders. "But this isn't really about you, Robert. It's about me finally recognizing my own worth." "The Art Hotel Commission. Emma mentioned it. That's fantastic, Gina. You deserve it." The compliment felt genuine, but it didn't carry the weight it once would have. I no longer needed his approval to validate my accomplishments. "Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should go." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Gina? For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I paused, looking back. "I believe you are, and that's a start." Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. I walked to my car with unhurried steps, savoring the sense of liberation that filled me. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "You were amazing tonight, Mom. So proud of you." I smiled, typing back, "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of me, too." Driving home, I thought about the journals I'd been reading all week. The record of a woman who had gradually allowed herself to be diminished. Tonight, I'd begun the process of reclaiming her, not with bitterness or drama, but with quiet dignity and truth. In my driveway, I sat for a moment before going inside. The house I'd bought after the divorce had always felt like a statement of my reduced circumstances, smaller, less impressive than the family home I'd left behind. Now, for the first time, I saw it differently. This house was mine, filled with my art, my books, evidence of a life rebuilt on my own terms. I went straight to my studio, switched on the lights, and stared at the painting I'd been working on, darkness giving way to gold and crimson. It wasn't quite finished. Tomorrow, I decided, I would add more light, more color. The darkness would still be there, part of the composition's depth and complexity, but it would no longer dominate. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Emma. That toast changed something. Dad and Caroline had a huge fight in the HD car. "I think you woke something up in him." I wasn't sure how to feel about that. For so long, I'd measured my worth against Robert's regard. No more. Whatever happened between him and Caroline was their business. My business was living authentically. From this moment forward, "Get some rest, graduate," I texted back. "Tomorrow is a new day." And it was, for all of us.